Mr. Speaker, sir, the timing is right according to what the Prime Minister just concluded. We think the contrary. We think that the timing is clearly not right. The timing is odd. This is the Prime Minister himself and his delegation are leaving in a few days for the COP26 conference negotiations. In the COP26 negotiations, Mauritius wishes, I presume, to appear credible. Mauritius wishes to appear sincere in its attempt to prevent the world from going upside down and from disaster hitting all of us. Mauritius, of course, being in the top 10 of countries most at risk from climate-related disasters. So the timing is odd. We are going to COP26, once again asking for funds. We are going to ask the international donors, overseas countries, to give us, Mr. Speaker, 210 billion rupees to finance 65% of our efforts, which our efforts in mitigation at least, which concerns us today, is we want to reduce the production of energy by we want to have 60% of energy produced from green sources in Mauritius, the total phasing out of coal before 2030, etc., etc. This is on page 4 of our initially nationally determined contribution for the Republic of Mauritius. So it is odd that we are going to ask for money, huge sums of money, to help us help the world and help ourselves. At the same time, a week before, we pass a bill that will, as the Prime Minister himself has said, make of Mauritius a major player. That's the word he used. A major player in the extraction of fossil fuels in the world. That is, I think, Mr. Speaker, incongruous. It is even a little bit sort of schizophrenic. We're going to ask to join the conference to reduce the use of fossil fuels, and at the same time, we want to be a major player in the production of the same fossil fuel for the future. And so, Mr. Speaker, I clearly think that the timing is not right, that this bill, if it were to come, would best come after the Prime Minister and the delegation has had a chance to meet other world leaders, has had a chance to listen to the conference, and maybe even be convinced at the conference as to what the way ahead is. And certainly, it would be a little odd if people were to give us 210 billion rupees on the one hand and expect to be walloped with far greater numbers of fossil fuel from the actions of the same country which they have helped to the tune of 210 billion rupees. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, it could be said that the bill presented today is not serious, it's not right, timing is wrong, and this bill, Mr. Speaker, sir, in my opinion, we have presented it today, so it's too late. It should be anyway, I think, fully debated after COP26 for the reasons that I am saying now. I mean, the Prime Minister should not insist on a vote today for this bill. Let's have it after COP26 when your delegation returns, and we'll see whether you still hold the same view or whether changes need to be made to our policy. Anyway, also, Mr. Speaker, what are we talking about when we talk about petroleum deposits, oil deposits? We're talking about a national resource. Not only a national resource, but a national resource that will be depleted over time. So, what is the position of Mauritians? Has anyone consulted Mauritians? This is the Assembly, yes. But all Mauritians are concerned. The youth are concerned. Should we Some countries, people talk of Guyana, some countries, the population has been against the production of oil. I said, no, we value our future more than the revenues that will accrue, supposedly accrue, from oil. So I think, Mr. Speaker, sir, this bill should not be voted before there is a national debate on the future actions that this country should take with regard to fossil fuels. Now, Mr. Speaker, also I think I'm a bit surprised when the Prime Minister mentioned that related this bill to the COVID-19 pandemic, as if now we are expecting our huge levels of debt, the record level of debt that we have never before have we had so much. In absolute terms, level of debt in Mauritius never had this level before in absolute terms, even after raiding the Bank of Mauritius. So it's highly optimistic of the Prime Minister to link the offshore petroleum industry to repayment of the debt, which he seems to have done which he seemed to have done in the opening of the speech, relating the bill to the huge expenses which have happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. I think, Mr. Speaker, sir, there is no guarantee that any oil will be found, that any oil in sufficient commercial quantities will be found and extracted. This depends on a lot of things, Mr. Speaker, sir. Firstly, it depends on really the existence of oil in the economic zone of Mauritius. That, to my mind, has not been established. Neither has it really been established in the Seychelles, which obviously are sister nation, which is ahead of us in terms of exploring for oil in their territory. So it hasn't really been established, neither in the Seychelles ahead of us, nor in Mauritius. And then, of course, you have to have it in commercial quantities, so fairly large. And we all know that Mauritian waters are extremely deep. And so, will the price of oil, as it is now, $85 to the barrel, let's say, for Brent, will that cover the cost of extraction or not? And what will happen to the price of oil in the future? With COP26 coming along, every country promising to reduce their dependence on fossil fuel. The UK has, as the House will know, recently announced that as from 2020, in a few years' time, no new petrol or diesel car will be sold in the UK, as from 2030, in a few years' time. So what is the real commercial benefit of extracting oil in Mauritius? Deep waters, the quantity, even if it is there, is not really known, and of course, whether the price of oil at any point in time will be sufficient to cover the cost of extraction. It is no secret that this sort of extraction of oil has been on the cards since independence. In the last PMSD Labour government, we dealt with it. We thought about it. You talk about the Commonwealth Secretariat, we had talks with them. The World Bank, we had talks with them. But in the end, the price of oil was not attractive enough for us to carry on. So whether now, when we're coming to the end of oil as the king of energy, now we are going to find that it is commercially viable. Well, Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't bet on it, and I certainly would not bet on it to repay our astronomical national debt. I would advise the government to find another means of repaying our national debt rather than on this questionable finding of oil in commercial quantities in Mauritius. Mr. Speaker, we've been told that since February 2020, I was not aware of this until recently, a large company called CGG, which I understand has also large financial troubles, but that's another issue, has had a contract to survey, seismic survey of some waters of Mauritius. Again, this is what I'm going to talk about in a moment. What transparency? Now, the Prime Minister has spoken for about an hour, maybe. He hasn't told us what this CGG, who is paying for that? What will it cost? Is the taxpayer paying for that? Are they paying it themselves? Are they finding, as I understand maybe is the case, some financiers to finance the activity? It must be quite expensive to do so. And if they are self-funding this activity, what will be the reward that is provided to CGG? Perhaps the Minister of Environment, who's talking after, can provide us some information on this. Because we need to know. Because one of the points that I'm going to raise, Mr. Speaker, is how open and transparent is the process of granting licenses to our national resource, if it exists. What are the safety safeguards? What are the transparency? And one example at hand is exactly the contract given to CGG, of which I believe the National Assembly knows nothing about. And I would invite the Prime Minister, and perhaps before him, the Minister of Environment, to be completely transparent about this contract, which worries me. How much will it cost? Who is paying for it? If somebody else is paying for it, it may be even worse. What is being promised in return? So, Mr. Speaker, that is an example of exactly what we want to avoid with the allocation of contracts under this forthcoming Offshore Petroleum Bill, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, who has advised government in the production of this bill? We are told that the Commercial Secretariat has initially advised government. What does that mean? Does it mean that this bill, being best practice, has been vetted and approved by the Commercial Secretariat, as it was our aim in the past? Or has it been that they've initially, maybe last year, 2 years ago, I don't know when, given some input, and then said the rest has been done by this famous department at the Prime Minister's office? Please, can we have additional comfort from the Prime Minister and his ministers as to what was the involvement of Commercial Secretariat and whether this bill has indeed been vetted and approved by them, which would surprise me, I must say, which would surprise me tremendously if that was the case. Now, Mr. Speaker, in this world, as the Prime Minister has said, there are many examples to follow and not to follow. And really the decision here is, which example do we follow? Do we follow Norway? Everybody applauds the way Norway has proceeded. Do we follow Alaska? Again, one of the leaders in good governance? Or do we follow Nigeria? That's also a possibility in Mauritius. We can follow Nigeria and some of the other countries where, in fact, oil probably has contributed making the country poorer because of the pollution and because of the corruption. So, Mr. Speaker, which are we going to follow? It is not clear in my mind. Now, why it's not clear? Because, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, there is absolutely no transparency in this act. It seems to be that we're going to have a department staffed by someone, and we don't know who it is, etc. Okay, that doesn't matter. A department in the Prime Minister's office, and that department will do everything. It will negotiate, it will find people, it will allocate contracts, it will decide everything. It will sign, even with the Prime Minister's approval, I see, it will sign the model petroleum agreement. This will all be done, and there seems to me to be no mention at all of any auction or open tender in the whole process. And we are potentially talking about billions, and not rupees, of dollars, Mr. Speaker. In my mind, Mr. Speaker, the minimum is that the bids must be open. The bids must be competitive. The bids must be transparent. That is the minimum that we can expect of Mauritius in 2021 that has just left, thank God, the grey list of the Financial Action Task Force. That is the minimum, but it is not here. It is not provided here. And this is a highly, of course, technical decision as to what are the environmental norms that will be applied to anyone seeking to operate in the offshore petroleum sector in Mauritius. Highly technical, Mr. Speaker, as far as the environment is concerned, and as far as the threats to pollution is concerned. Even Florida, Mr. Speaker, of the USA has not been spared. So that is the wrong partner, Mr. Speaker. Getting the wrong partner, getting the wrong technology would be a disaster for Mauritius. So I can see here no transparency. There is titles register, which the Prime Minister has mentioned, when the paper has a title, etc. But even there, it says that commercially sensitive information will not be given to anyone, I presume even to the House, and now even not even to the Director of Audit, from what the Commissioner of Police has done. And of course, Section 79 of the bill does impose a duty of confidentiality on everyone involved in this sector concerned by this bill. So, Mr. Speaker, no transparency at all. And obviously there, the temptation for any government would be tremendous. And let's look now at the example of Exxon, big company, Exxon in Guyana, where there was one recent article which claimed that the government there had wittingly, unwittingly, up to us to decide, we don't know, signed a deal with Exxon that had lost tens of billions of dollars potentially to the Guyana Republic. That is also a possibility. Wittingly or unwittingly, lack of knowledge, lack of experience, obviously these guys, let's take Exxon, they will be experts in negotiations, Mr. Speaker. Who in Mauritius is an expert in negotiating oil deals? The Prime Minister has not talked to us about who is going to assist in even examining the bids, deciding whether the bid is good or not good. Let's imagine, Mr. Speaker, that we'll talk about the various taxes. The levels are not provided for in the bill. We don't know how much is going to be the additional taxes and royalties, etc. That is going to be by negotiation. That is what we understand. Now, these are too high, Mr. Speaker. No one will come. These are too low. The government and the people of Mauritius will use billions upon billions of dollars. So, will the Prime Minister tell us now that he wants to have this bill passed with a certificate of urgency today? What provision has he made to obtain appropriate technical advice on the environment and also, as importantly, appropriate advice on negotiations, assistance on negotiations, and advice on what level to set our taxes so that nobody loses out in this deal, Mr. Speaker. And I note that, again, Seychelles is better than us. Their law is published in the law a model petroleum agreement. Where can you see this in this bill? It's a secret. Nobody will bother to give this Parliament the model petroleum agreement. So again, we are completely in the dark, Mr. Speaker, sir. Let me come now, not going to be that long, on the famous Petroleum Fund, Section 74. Now, I mentioned before that the resource, the petrol, is limited in time, the oil, limited in time, won't be there forever. We use it, we get revenue for it for some time, and then we see what is to be done with the money. Now, the quality of the institutions, which is going to manage potentially billions of rupees of taxpayers' money. Nothing is said in this bill about the quality of that institution. All we know is going to be managed like by MOFED, Ministry of Finance. Are we going to see another MIC, Mauritius Investment Corporation, with friends and friends of friends queuing up? And we have more information coming on AIC soon. You will see. Friends of friends coming up to borrow hundreds of millions of rupees, if not billions of rupees. Is the Petroleum Fund going to be another MIC? Because I can see no provision in the law either for transparency, for review, for accountability. None whatsoever, Mr. Speaker. So, the Petroleum Fund, is it going to be like Norway, Alaska? Or are we going to be like Nigeria, Chad, and all these countries, Mr. Speaker, that have seen their national wealth depleted, wasted, corrupted over time? Mr. Speaker, we need transparency badly. We need quality institutions. And this bill, if it were a serious bill, would provide Mauritians with the guarantee that the Petroleum Fund, with a scheme, a schema, for how the Petroleum Fund would be run, how it would be managed, what would be its priorities, and what would be the transparency and involvement of the National Assembly in the use of the Petroleum Fund in national resource. And I would suggest, Mr. Speaker, sir, that if ever we find petrol, and that is a big if, then the Petroleum Fund should be accountable to a committee of this House, because this money belongs to the nation and to future generations, and we cannot just leave it like MIC, like so many of these special funds, in the hands only, in the secret hands of government. As we know, Mr. Speaker, even simple questions on the Mauritius Investment Corporation, which has 80 billion rupees of taxpayers' money, were virtually refused in this House, which is in itself a scandal, Mr. Speaker. So here we are. We have this fund. We don't know how it's going to be managed. We don't know what the objectives are. All we know is that if ever we find oil, if ever, then billions will be coming to that fund. Mr. Speaker, I will end here to say that I really think that this bill is not ready to be passed in Parliament. It has substantial lacuna as far as accountability is concerned, and I will certainly, Mr. Speaker, be voting against this bill. To say whether Mauritius should go or should not go into oil exploration is a subject for national debate. Of course, we are entitled to obtain money to help the poor the people who most need it. Of course we are. But we have also responsibility towards future generations. And this must be fully debated before we proceed, Mr. Speaker. And I will reserve my judgment in time, but that must be fully debated. At the moment, Mr. Speaker, and to finish, I say to me, this bill looks like a shot in the dark, or maybe not. Or maybe, in fact, there are punters and promoters which are waiting discreetly in the corridors of power. Time will tell, Mr. Speaker, sir. Time will tell. Hopefully we will find out what really happens despite all the confidentiality clauses that are included in this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We suspend the sitting for 30 minutes for refueling.